She's gone, David. The words shattered the heavy silence of the royal study. Alpha King David stared at Beta Marcus, the aged wood of his desk biting into his gripping hands. Gone? David's voice was a dangerous rasp, low and vibrating with a primal frequency that set the silver goblets on the side table rattling. Lunas do not simply vanish from the high seat of the silver mane. She didn't just vanish. Marcus swallowed hard, avoiding the king's eyes. She was taken by the Lycan king's emissaries. And sire, she took the child. The scent of stale wine and the lingering perfume of another woman, Lisa's sister, clung to David's skin like a curse. He had returned to fix his mistake. He had returned too late. The dawn broke over the Silvermane territory, casting long, accusing shadows across the courtyard. Alpha King David stood on the balcony of his chambers, the cold wind whipping at his unbuttoned linen shirt. Below him, the pack was waking, a tapestry of routines and quiet murmurs. None of them knew yet. They didn't know their Luna was gone, or why. He closed his eyes. The memory of last night, a jagged stone in his gut. Helena, Lisa's sister. It had been a blur of misplaced anger, of firewater, and a momentary, unforgivable weakness. He had woken up with the taste of ash in his mouth and a cold certainty that he had broken something irreparable. He had rushed back to the royal wing, ready to confess, to beg, to tear down the walls he had built between him and Lisa. Instead, he found an empty suite. The bed was untouched. Her scent, a delicate blend of jasmine and rain, was fading, replaced by the sterile smell of absence. Alpha. David turned, his jaw set. Beta Marcus stood in the doorway, his face etched with exhaustion. Marcus had been with him since they were pups. He was the only one who dared approach the king when the wolf beneath his skin was this close to the surface. "Report," David commanded, his tone clipped. "The border patrols found no signs of struggle," Marcus said, stepping into the room. "No breached defenses. It appears she went willingly." "Willingly?" David stepped closer, his golden eyes flashing. "With the Lycan King's guard? Are you suggesting my Luna committed treason?" "I am suggesting nothing, sire. Only presenting the facts." Marcus held his ground. "The Lycan emissaries arrived late last night. They requested an audience. You were unavailable. Luna Lisa received them." David flinched at the word unavailable. It was a polite way of saying he was buried in a bottle in another woman's bed. "What did they want?" "We don't know. The meeting was private. An hour later they departed, and the Luna's carriage went with them." Marcus paused, taking a slow breath. "The nursery is empty, David. The young prince is gone." The mention of his son, barely a year old, hit David like a physical blow. He stumbled back, leaning heavily against the balcony rail. His son, his heir, gone. "Prepare my guard," David ordered. The tremor in his voice betrayed his panic. "We ride for the Lycan territories immediately." "David, wait," Marcus urged, abandoning titles in the face of the king's unraveling. "You cannot just storm the Lycan court. King Kalen is not a man to be trifled with. If she went willingly, a direct assault is an act of war. She is my mate. She is the Luna of this pack." David roared, the sound echoing across the courtyard, startling a flock of ravens into the bruised sky. "I will not let some ancient monster steal my family." "And what of Elena?" The question hung in the air. toxic and heavy. David stared at his beta, the fight draining from him, replaced by a cold, sickening dread. "What about her?" David asked quietly. "She is currently in the lower halls, demanding an audience. She claims she has the right to stand by your side now." Marcus's expression was unreadable. "Rumors are already spreading. If you leave now, the pack will fracture." David raked a hand through his hair, the weight of the crown suddenly unbearable. He had a pack on the verge of scandal, a mistress demanding a throne, and a mate who had fled into the arms of the most dangerous man in their world. He had to choose, but every choice felt like stepping off a cliff. "Keep Elena contained," David finally said, his voice void of emotion. "Tell her nothing. I will deal with her later." "And the Luna?" David turned back to the rising sun, the light doing nothing to warm the chill in his bones. "Send a raven to King Kalen. Request a formal summit." David's eyes hardened. "I will play their game. For now." The journey to the Lycan court took 3 agonizing days. 3 days of relentless riding, pushing his horse and his guard to their limits. David barely slept, haunted by visions of Lisa. He saw her smile, the way her eyes crinkled when she laughed at his sternness. He saw the quiet strength she carried, a strength he had so often overlooked, taking it for granted. He also saw the look in her eyes the last time they spoke. It wasn't anger. It was disappointment, a bone-deep weariness that he had failed to recognize. The Lycan territories were a stark contrast to the verdant lands of the Silver Mane. Here, the mountains clawed at the sky, rugged and unforgiving. The air was thinner, colder, carrying the scent of pine and ancient magic. The Lycan court, a sprawling fortress carved into the side of a sheer cliff, loomed ahead. It was a place of legends and whispers, a place where the old ways still held sway. King Kalen was not just an alpha. He was a king among kings, a Lycan whose bloodline predated recorded history. David's entourage was met at the gates by a stoic guard in dark armor. They were escorted through winding, torch-lit corridors, the silence broken only by the rhythmic clanking of their boots. They were brought to the great hall. It was cavernous, shadows clinging to the high-vaulted ceiling. At the far end, seated on a throne of obsidian, was King Kalen. He was a massive man, radiating an aura of raw, suppressed power. His hair was silver, his eyes a piercing, icy blue that seemed to look right through David. But David's attention was instantly drawn to the figure standing slightly behind and to the right of the throne. Lisa. She wore a gown of deep sapphire, the color bringing out the richness of her dark hair. She looked composed, regal, and entirely untouchable. She didn't look like a captive. She looked like a queen. "Alpha King David." Kalen's voice resonated through the hall, a deep rumble that vibrated in David's chest. "You requested an audience." "I came for my mate and my son," David stated, stepping forward, his posture rigid. He refused to look at Lisa, afraid his resolve would crumble. "Your mate?" Kalen raised a silver eyebrow, a faint, mocking smile playing on his lips. "I see no mate here. I see a woman who sought sanctuary." "Sanctuary from what?" David demanded, his temper flaring. "She is the Luna of the Silver Mane. Her place is by my side." "Is it?" The question didn't come from Kalen. David finally turned his gaze to Lisa. Her voice was calm, steady, devoid of the warmth he remembered. "Lisa," David breathed, taking a step toward her. The Lycan guards instantly tensed, their hands dropping to their hilts. "You have no right to that name, David." Lisa said, her eyes meeting his without flinching. Not anymore. I made a mistake, David pleaded, ignoring the king, ignoring the guards. He needed her to understand. I was a fool. But I am here now. We can fix this. A mistake? Lisa's laugh was a dry, hollow sound. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary, David. A mistake is not spending the night with my sister while I paced the halls, wondering why my mate's bond felt like shattered glass. The words hit him like physical blows. She knew. Of course she knew. The bond, even frayed, would have told her. It meant nothing. He choked out, a desperate defense. That is the tragedy of it. Lisa replied quietly. You destroyed our family for something that meant nothing. I want my son, David demanded, his voice hardening, desperation turning into anger. You cannot keep the heir to the Silvermane from his father. Kaelin leaned forward, the mocking smile gone, replaced by a predatory stillness. The child is safe, Kaelin said softly. Safer here than in a pack where the alpha cannot even keep his own vows. He is under my protection now. You have no claim to him, David snarled, his wolf pushing against his skin, his eyes flashing gold. I have the only claim that matters, Kaelin replied, standing up. He towered over David, a monument of ancient power. The claim of sanctuary granted. You may leave, Alpha David, or you may stay and face the consequences of challenging me in my own hall. David stood there, his chest heaving, torn between the urge to shift and tear the hall apart, and the crushing realization that he had lost everything. He looked at Lisa one last time. She wasn't looking at him. Her gaze was fixed on the obsidian floor, a mask of perfect composure. He turned and walked away, the echo of his footsteps the only sound in the vast, cold hall. The ride back to the Silvermane territory was a descent into a nightmare. David rode in silence, his jaw locked, his eyes fixed on the horizon. The cold wind of the Lycan mountains bit through his cloak, but it was nothing compared to the icy void in his chest. Every rhythmic thud of his horse's hooves echoed Lisa's words. You have no right to that name. Not anymore. He had expected anger. He had expected tears, shouting, perhaps even a physical blow. Anything that signaled she still cared enough to fight him. But the cold detachment, the regal indifference she displayed while standing beside Kaelin, that was a blade twisting in his gut. Marcus rode beside him, maintaining a respectful distance. The beta knew better than to offer platitudes. The air around the Alpha King was thick with suppressed rage and a profound, sickening grief. When they finally crossed the border into their own lands, the familiar scent of pine and rich earth offered no comfort. It only served as a stark reminder of what he had jeopardized. As the royal estate came into view, the tension in the air was palpable. Word had undoubtedly spread. The pack was anxious. They could feel the discord in the bond, the gaping hole where their Luna should be. David dismounted before his horse had fully stopped, tossing the reins to a waiting stable hand. He strode toward the main hall, Marcus trailing closely. Gather the council, David ordered, not looking back. I want them in the war room in 10 minutes. Sire, you need rest, Marcus began, but David cut him off with a sharp glare. I need answers, Marcus, and I need a strategy. He pushed open the heavy oak doors of the grand hall. It was quiet, the usual hum of pack life subdued. But as he crossed the threshold, a figure stepped out from the shadows near the grand staircase. Elena. She looked entirely out of place in the grandeur of the hall. She wore a simple dress, her hair unkempt, a stark contrast to Lisa's usual immaculate presentation. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and she held herself with a defensive posture, a brittle mix of defiance and fear. "David," she said, taking a tentative step forward. David stopped. The scent of her, the scent that had clouded his judgment, the scent he now associated with his downfall, hit him. His wolf recoiled. The momentary madness that had driven him into her arms was gone, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. "You have no place here, Elena," David said, his voice flat, devoid of any warmth he might have shown her in the past. "I have every place here." Her voice rose, shrill and desperate. "Lisa is gone. She abandoned you. She abandoned the pack. I am here." "She left because of you," David growled, stepping closer, the sheer force of his presence making her shrink back. "Because of my weakness and your ambition." "It wasn't ambition. It was love," Elena cried, tears spilling over. I said a lot of things when I was drowning in a bottle and feeling ignored by my mate." David interrupted harshly. "It was a mistake, a catastrophic mistake that cost me my family." He saw the realization dawn in her eyes, the shattering of whatever fantasy she had built in her mind. He didn't care. "Marcus," David called out without turning around, "escort Elena to the border. She is no longer welcome in the Silvermane territory." Elena gasped. "You can't do that. I'm her sister." "You ceased being her sister the moment you entered my bed," David said, his tone chillingly final. "And I am the Alpha King. I can do whatever I deem necessary for the stability of my pack." He walked past her, ignoring her pleas and Marcus's quiet compliance. He had bigger problems than a spurned mistress. He had a kingdom to hold together and a family to steal back. In the war room, the council members were already gathered. They were old wolves, seasoned warriors, and political minds who had advised his father before him. Their faces were grim. "Let's dispense with the pleasantries," David said, leaning over the large oak table in the center of the room. A map of the territories was spread across it. "The Luna is in the Lycan court, under the protection of King Kalen." A murmur rippled through the room. "Did she go willingly, sire?" asked General Thorne, a massive brute of a wolf with a scarred face. "It appears so," David admitted, the words tasting like ash. "Then we have a crisis of leadership," stated Lady Alara, the oldest member of the council. "A Luna who abandons her pack weakens the Alpha, and by extension, the entire territory." "I am not weak." David's eyes flashed gold, daring her to challenge him. "Your actions suggest otherwise, David," Alara said calmly, unaffected by his display of dominance. She had changed his diapers. She wasn't afraid of his fangs. "The rumors concerning Elena." "Elena has been exiled." David cut her off. "That issue is handled." "It is a symptom, not the disease," Alara countered. "You fractured the bond. You drove her away. And now, she sits with our most powerful neighbor." "Kalen claims she sought sanctuary," David said, tracing the border of the Lycan territory on the map. "He has my son." Thorne slammed a fist on the table. "Then we march. We cannot let a Lycan hold the heir to the Silvermane hostage." "He is not a hostage," Marcus interjected, stepping into the room. "Kalen claims sanctuary. An attack would be an act of war against a force we cannot hope to defeat in a direct siege. The Lycan court is impregnable." "So we do nothing?" Thorne sneered. "No. David said softly, a dangerous edge returning to his voice. We don't do nothing. We negotiate. We scheme. If I cannot take my family by force, I will take them by guile. He looked around the table, his gaze hardening. Kaelin may be ancient, but he is still a man. He has weaknesses. He has enemies. We will find them. We will exploit them. I will have my Luna and my son back, even if I have to burn the Lycan court to the ground to do it. The council remained silent. They saw the desperation in their king, the reckless fire that threatened to consume them all. David was walking a razor's edge, and one wrong step would plunge the Silvermane into a war they could not win. The Lycan court was not what Lysa had expected. She had anticipated a dungeon, or at best, a cold, austere confinement fitting a captive queen. Instead, she found herself in a suite of rooms that rivaled the opulence of the Silvermane Palace, though the aesthetic was distinctly different. Here, everything was carved stone, dark woods, and heavy furs. A massive fireplace dominated the main sitting room, keeping the mountain chill at bay. The windows were tall and arched, offering a breathtaking, if terrifying, view of the sheer drop to the valley below. It was beautiful, wild, and undeniably a cage. She stood by the window, watching the snow begin to fall, a gentle dusting over the harsh landscape. In the adjoining room, her son Leo was sleeping peacefully. His presence was the only thing keeping her tethered to sanity. The first few days had been a blur of shock and adrenaline. When the bond had snapped, not broken, but severely damaged, vibrating with the sickening realization of David's betrayal, well, she hadn't thought. She had just acted. The arrival of the Lycan emissaries, a mere coincidence regarding a border dispute, had provided a sudden, desperate escape route. She hadn't planned to go to Kaelin. She had just needed to get away from the smell of Elena in her home, the overwhelming suffocation of a life built on a lie. The emissaries had recognized her distress, recognized the value of the Silvermane Luna, and offered safe passage. Now, the adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a hollow ache. She had seen David in the Great Hall. She had seen the desperation in his eyes, the frantic need to fix what he had broken. Part of her, the part that was still tethered to him by the frayed remnants of their bond, had wanted to run to him. But the larger part, the part that was a Luna, a mother, and a woman scorned, held firm. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary. A soft knock at the door broke her reverie. Before she could answer, the heavy oak door swung open, and King Kaelin entered. He didn't ask permission, she noted. He was the undisputed master here. He wore simpler clothes today, dark trousers and a thick woolen tunic. But the aura of power remained undiminished. Luna Lysa, he said, his voice a low rumble. He didn't use her title mockingly, but rather as a statement of fact. King Kaelin, she replied, turning from the window but not stepping away from it. She kept her chin high, refusing to show intimidation. He walked to the center of the room, observing her with those piercing blue eyes. Are the accommodations to your liking? The child is well. The rooms are fine. Leo is safe. Thank you for the sanctuary. She kept her answers clipped, professional. Kaelin offered a small, knowing smile. Sanctuary. It is a powerful word. It implies danger from which one needs protecting. I needed distance, Lysa corrected. Not necessarily protection. Distance from a mate who cannot control his baser instincts, Kaelin observed, moving toward the fireplace and holding his hands out to the flames. A common failing among younger alphas. They let their wolves rule them. David is not weak. She found herself defending him, almost instinctively, before biting her tongue. She didn't want to discuss David with this ancient king. No, not weak. Just distracted. Kaelin turned to face her. You showed remarkable composure in the Great Hall. Many would have crumbled under the Alpha King's command. I am not one of his guards to be ordered around, she said, her voice firm. No, you are not. He studied her for a long moment. You are an interesting complication, Lisa of the Silver Mane. You arrived on my doorstep, uninvited, bringing the heir to a rival pack. I can leave, she said quickly, though the thought of venturing out into the freezing mountains with a toddler was terrifying. If I am a complication, we will go. And go where? Kaelin asked softly. Back to a mate who humiliated you? To a pack that will whisper behind your back? Or perhaps you plan to wander the rogue lands? She had no answer. She had acted on instinct, not strategy. You are here now, Kaelin continued. And here you will stay, for the time being, as my guest. A guest usually has the freedom to leave, she pointed out. A guest does not dictate terms to their host, Kaelin replied smoothly. He stepped closer, and for the first time, she felt the true weight of his presence. It wasn't the aggressive dominance of a young alpha. It was the suffocating pressure of a mountain. What do you want, King Kaelin? She asked, fighting the urge to step back. You didn't take us in out of the goodness of your heart. Lycans do nothing without a purpose. His smile widened slightly, a flash of white teeth. You are perceptive. I like that. What I want, Lisa, is leverage. The Silver Mane territories border mine. David is ambitious, perhaps too ambitious for his own good. Having his Luna and his heir in my keep ensures his good behavior. You are using us as hostages. I prefer the term insurance policy, Kaelin said smoothly. As long as David remains cooperative, you and the child will be treated with the utmost respect. You will lack for nothing. And if he doesn't cooperate? Kaelin's eyes grew cold, the icy blue turning to flint. Then I will remind him of the cost of defiance. He turned and walked toward the door, pausing with his hand on the iron handle. Rest, Luna. We have a grand dinner this evening. I expect you to attend. It is important that my court sees you are well treated and securely held. The door closed with a heavy thud, the sound echoing in the opulent room. Lisa turned back to the window, the snow now falling heavily, obscuring the valley below. She had escaped one cage only to walk willingly into another. This one was gilded, yes, but the bars were made of ancient magic and political maneuvering. She was a pawn in a game she didn't fully understand, trapped between a mate who had broken her heart and a king who intended to use her to break her pack. She walked into the adjoining room and looked down at Leo. He was a piece of David, a piece of the life she thought she had. She gently stroked his soft hair. She couldn't rely on David to save her. She couldn't trust Kaelin. If she was going to survive this, if she was going to protect her son, she had to play the game better than both of them. The gown provided by Kaelin's servants was a masterpiece of midnight blue velvet, heavily embroidered with silver thread that mirrored the Lycan crest. It was beautiful, heavy, and felt distinctly like a collar. Lisa stood before the tall, clouded mirror in her chambers, her fingers tracing the rigid boning of the bodice. She refused to wear her hair down, as the handmaidens had suggested. Instead, she twisted it into a complex, severe braid, securing it with a pair of sharp, silver pins she had brought from Silvermane. If she was to be a pawn, she would be a dangerous one. When the heavy oak doors of the great hall were thrown open for her, a wall of sound washed over her. Deep, booming laughter, the clatter of heavy pewter goblets, the tearing of meat. But as she crossed the threshold, the noise died. Dozens of Lycan lords and ladies turned their golden, icy blue and amber eyes upon her. The silence was heavy, oppressive, thick with the scent of predatory curiosity. Lisa kept her chin parallel to the floor, her steps measured and silent on the stone. She didn't look at the sprawling tables or the roaring hearths. She kept her eyes fixed on the raised dais at the far end, where King Kalen watched her approach like a spider watching a moth. Ah, the Luna of the Silvermane graces us. Kalen's voice carried effortlessly through the cavernous hall. He gestured to the empty chair to his immediate right, a position of extreme honor and a blatant display of possession. Lisa took the seat gracefully, nodding her head a fraction of an inch. King Kalen, your hospitality is immense. We Lycans believe in providing for those who seek our hearth, Kalen replied smoothly, picking up a heavy goblet of dark wine. He turned to the hall. My lords, tonight we feast in honor of the sanctuary we provide. Let the world know that the Lycan court protects those who realize the frailty of lesser packs. A low cheer rumbled through the room. Lisa felt a flush of heat in her cheeks, but she forced her hands to remain loosely folded in her lap. He was using her to publicly humiliate David and assert dominance over the Silvermane. As the feast commenced, the differences between their kinds became starkly apparent. The meat served to the Lycans was bloody, barely seared, while hers was roasted to perfection. The conversation around her was brutal, focused on border skirmishes, hunting, and power. To Kalen's left sat a scarred, imposing Lycan, whose furred cloak barely concealed the massive network of battle wounds across his neck and chest. Kalen introduced him only as General Silas. Tell me, Luna. Silas rumbled, tearing a chunk of meat from a bone with frightening ease. Is it true the Silvermane Alpha spends his days brooding while his borders are left vulnerable? We hear rumors of unrest since your departure. Lisa turned to Silas, her gaze steady. She recognized a test when she saw one. Alpha David is a formidable leader, General. Any unrest is merely the shifting of a pack temporarily adjusting its weight. To mistake his brooding for weakness would be a fatal tactical error. Kalen chuckled, a low, dangerous sound. Fiercely loyal, even to the mate who betrayed you. Commendable, but perhaps misplaced. My loyalty is to my son, and to the stability of the world he will inherit. Lisa countered smoothly, turning back to the king. I do not defend my mate's personal failings. I defend the strength of the Silvermane. I suggest your generals do not underestimate them, regardless of who sits in this chair tonight. Silence stretched across the high table. Silas stopped chewing, his icy blue eyes fixed on her. For a heartbeat, Lisa thought she had gone too far. Then, a slow, grim smile stretched across Silas's scarred face. He raised his goblet to her in a microscopic nod of genuine respect. Kalen noticed the exchange. His smile didn't waver, but the temperature around him seemed to drop. A toast, then, Kalen announced, standing. To mothers, and the extraordinary lengths they will go to protect their young. Lisa stood with him, lifting her own glass. She drank the wine, her mind racing. Kalen was powerful, but he was arrogant. He ruled by fear and absolute strength. But Silas respected courage. If she was going to find a crack in this gilded cage, it wouldn't be through the king. It would be through the wolves who followed him. The air in the Silvermane war room was thick with the scent of old parchment and fresh anxiety. 4 weeks had passed since Lisa and Leo had vanished into the mountains. 4 weeks of David pacing the stone floors until dawn, his wolf gnawing at the bars of his ribcage, demanding violence. The trade routes through the Whispering Pass have been completely sealed, sire, Marcus reported, tracing a heavily inked line on the map spread across the oak table. No Lycan caravans are getting through to the southern markets. We've effectively choked off their supply of refined silver and southern grains. And their response? David asked, his voice low, lacking its usual boom. He looked hollowed out, the shadows under his eyes speaking of sleepless, agonizing nights. Silence, mostly. General Thorne grumbled, leaning heavily on the table. They are proud beasts. They will starve before they beg. But we are hurting our own merchants in the process. The council is growing restless, David. Sealing the borders hurts us both. Let them hurt, David snapped, his golden eyes flashing with a sudden, feral intensity. We are already bleeding. A little economic starvation is the least of what Kaelin deserves. I want the squeeze tightened. No exceptions. If a single wagon bearing the Lycan crest gets within 10 miles of our border, burn it. The council members exchanged uneasy glances. This wasn't the measured, tactical alpha who had led them to prosperity. This was a wounded animal lashing out. David, Lady Alara said softly, her ancient eyes filled with a sad understanding. Starving Kaelin's merchants will not make him surrender Aluna. It will only provoke a physical retaliation. We are poking a sleeping bear with a very short stick. Then let him wake up. David slammed his fist onto the table, the wood groaning under the force. Let him march his monstrous army down from those cursed mountains. At least then I can fight him. And what of your son? Marcus interjected quietly. The words acted like ice water thrown on a fire. David's shoulders slumped, the sudden burst of rage evaporating, leaving only the crushing weight of reality. If war breaks out, the boy is caught in the middle. King Kaelin is using them as a shield. You cannot strike the shield without hitting what hides behind it. David turned away from the table, walking toward the tall, arched window that looked out over the courtyard. The pack was going about its business, but there was a palpable gloom hanging over the estate. The heartbeat of the Silvermane was irregular, missing its Luna. Dismissed, David ordered without turning around. Maintain the blockade. I will not hear another word of appeasement. The council filed out silently, leaving only Marcus behind. The beta stood in the center of the room, watching his king unravel. It was Elena, David whispered to the glass, fogging the pain with his breath. Marcus frowned. Elena is gone, David. Exiled to the rogue lands. Not just the betrayal, Marcus. David turned, his face etched in agony. It was the scent. I was drowning in grief over my father's death. Drowning in the pressures of the crown. She wore Lisa's perfume, the jasmine and rain. I was drunk, I was broken, and for a fraction of a second, I thought I was pulling my mate into my arms to anchor me. He closed his eyes, a single tear escaping. When I realized who it was too late. The damage was done. The bond cracked. You don't need to explain it to me, sire, Marcus said gently. I have to explain it to her? David said, his eyes snapping open, the gold returning, sharper and colder this time. He walked past Marcus, heading for the door. He didn't stop until he reached the royal wing, bypassing his own chambers and pushing open the door to the nursery. The room was perfectly still, preserved exactly as it had been the night they left. He walked over to the small, ornate crib and picked up a wooden wolf pup he had whittled for Leah with his own hands. He squeezed the toy until his knuckles turned white. He couldn't wage a war. He couldn't starve them out. Both paths risked the two things he loved most in the world. "Marcus," David called out. The beta had followed him, lingering in the hallway. "Sire, cancel the blockade. Let the trade routes open by dawn," David ordered, slipping the wooden wolf into his pocket. Marcus looked relieved, but confused. "You are conceding?" "No," David said, stepping out of the nursery and pulling the door firmly shut behind him. The hollow look was gone, replaced by a terrifying cold resolve. "I am going to stop acting like a king and start acting like a shadow. Find me Elian." Marcus paled. Elian was a ghost, a rogue tracker and thief who answered to no pack, only to gold, and occasionally to David. "Elian is dangerous, David. He plays by no one's rules." "Exactly," David said, his jaw locked. "I can't bring down the Lycan court with an army. I'm going to do it from the inside. And I'm going to bring my family home." The eastern face of the Lycan stronghold was a vertical drop of jagged granite, plunging 1,000 feet into a valley of jagged pines. It was considered impassable, unscalable, and therefore lightly guarded, which made it the perfect front door for a ghost. Elian clung to the freezing stone, his fingers wedged into a fissure no wider than a blade. He didn't wear armor. It was too heavy, too noisy. He was clad in reinforced leather, dyed the color of wet stone, and his skin was smeared with a mixture of pine ash and river mud to mask his scent. He was not a wolf, nor a Lycan. He was something in between, a rogue born of mixed blood, who had long ago traded the concept of a pack for the cold, hard certainty of gold. The wind howled around him, tearing at his clothes and threatening to peel him off the cliff face. He paused, pressing his cheek against the icy rock, listening. Above him, the faint, rhythmic pacing of a Lycan sentry vibrated through the stone. 50 paces left. Pause for 10 seconds. 50 paces right. Elian waited for the sentry to move right. With a burst of terrifying, coiled strength, he launched himself upward, catching the edge of a stone balcony. He hung there over the abyss, muscles burning, holding his breath as the sentry pivoted above. The heavy footfalls moved away. Elian hoisted himself over the balustrade, melting into the deep shadows of the arched doorway. He was in. But being in the Lycan court was only the prologue. Finding the silver mane Luna in a fortress of 1,000 rooms was the actual job. 2 levels below, Lisa sat in the expansive royal library. It was a magnificent room, smelling of old leather, dust, and beeswax. The fire crackled in the hearth, but the warmth barely penetrated the bone-deep chill of the mountain. She had spent the last week mapping the castle in her mind, turning her gilded cage into a grid. She turned a page of a massive, illuminated history of the Lycan Wars. Though she wasn't reading, she was observing. "You read of our conquests, Luna," a deep voice rumbled from the shadows of the stacks. Lisa didn't flinch. She deliberately placed a silk marker in the book and closed it before looking up. General Silas stood there, his massive frame blocking the narrow aisle. He wore no armor today, just a heavy tunic that did nothing to hide the terrible scars roping up his neck. "I am reading of your tactics, General," Lisa corrected mildly, folding her hands on the heavy oak table. "Conquest is simply the result of applied force. Tactics are the intellect behind it." Silas moved closer, pulling out a chair opposite her. The wood groaned under his weight as he sat. "And what have you deduced of our intellect?" "That you are patient," Lisa said, meeting his icy blue gaze. "The texts say the Lycans besieged the northern coves for 3 years before striking. You starved them, isolated them, and waited for their internal politics to fracture." Silas offered a grim, approving smile. "A fractured shield shatters easily under a hammer." "Indeed," Lisa murmured. She leaned forward slightly. "Tell me, Silas, how long does King Kaelin intend to wait for the Silver Mane to fracture? Because while my mate may be distracted, Beta Marcus is not. He will not let the pack starve." The general's smile faded, replaced by a look of stark, calculating intelligence. "You are fishing for a timeline, Luna, but I will tell you this, free of charge. Kaelin does not keep pets that don't bite on command. He has brought you here to light a fire under David. If David does not march on us soon, Kaelin will find another way to force his hand." Lisa's blood ran cold. "He wants a war. He wants the silver mines." Silas corrected bluntly. "The Silver Mane sits on the richest vein of ore on the continent. Your presence here is simply the justification he needs to take them. If David attacks to reclaim you, he is the aggressor. Kaelin defends his sanctuary and counterattacks, claiming the mines as reparations." Lisa stared at the scarred warrior. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I am a soldier, not a butcher," Silas said softly, standing up. "I respect a leader who fights for their people. I do not respect a king who uses a mother and child as bait to steal rocks. Be careful, Lisa, of the Silver Mane. The ice here is very thin." He turned and melted back into the shadows, leaving Lisa alone with the crackling fire and a sudden, suffocating realization. She wasn't just leverage. She was the match meant to burn her own kingdom to the ground. The moon was high and silver, casting sharp, skeletal shadows across the floor of Lisa's chambers. She sat in a high-backed chair near the crib, watching Leo's chest rise and fall. Silas's words echoed in her head, a persistent, rhythmic drumbeat of impending doom. She needed to get a message to Marcus. She needed to warn them not to retaliate, no matter the provocation. A soft scrape of leather on stone made her freeze. It hadn't come from the heavy oak door leading to the corridor. It had come from the balcony. Lisa stood up silently, her hand wrapping around the heavy iron fire poker resting by the hearth. She moved into the shadows, pressing her back against the wall near the arched glass doors. A figure slipped through the gap in the doors. They moved with an unnatural fluidity, a silhouette that smelled faintly of mud, pine, and ozone. Lisa didn't hesitate. She swung the iron poker in a vicious, silent arc aimed directly at the intruder's knees. The figure dropped, catching the iron rod with a thickly gloved hand mere inches from his leg. "Fate's above, Luna," a raspy, breathless voice hissed. "You swing like a blacksmith." Lisa ripped the poker back, raising it to strike again. "Who are you?" "Elian," the man whispered, slowly raising his hands in surrender. He stayed crouched on the floor. "I work for David." Lisa's grip on the iron tightened, her knuckles turning white. The mention of his name sent a shockwave of grief and fury through her system. David doesn't send assassins through windows. He sends armies through front gates. "Exactly why I'm here instead of an army," Elian said, slowly reaching into his chest pocket. He couldn't risk the war. He sent a ghost. He held out his hand, uncurling his fingers. Resting in his palm was a small, crudely carved wooden wolf pup. Lisa stared at it. Her breath hitched. It was the toy David had whittled for Leo, the one he always kept on his desk. She snatched it from Elian's hand, bringing it close to her chest. It smelled, very faintly, of cedar, bergamot, and David. Tears pricked her eyes, but she blinked them back violently. A wooden toy did not erase betrayal. "He wants you out," Elian whispered, finally standing, though he kept his posture deferential. "I have ropes anchored on the eastern face. The drop is sheer, but the guards don't patrol it. I can get you both down, over the border, and back to Silvermane by tomorrow night." Lisa looked at the ropes slung over Elian's shoulder, then looked at the crib. "You expect me to strap my 1-year-old son to my chest and rappel down a 1,000-foot cliff face in the dead of winter? It's the only way, Luna. If we go through the lower levels, the Lycans will smell us." "It's suicide," Lisa hissed, pacing away from him. "If the wind catches us, if a rope frays, if Leo cries out, we are dead. If you stay here, Kalen uses you to start a war that kills thousands," Elian argued, stepping forward. "David sent me to bring you home." "David broke my home," Lisa snapped, her voice rising dangerously close to a normal volume before she forced it back down. "He doesn't get to summon me back like a misplaced cloak just because he finally realized what he threw away." Before Elian could respond, the heavy oak door leading to the corridor rattled. A loud, authoritative knock followed. "Luna Lisa." It was Kalen's voice, deep and resonant. "Are you awake?" Lisa's blood turned to ice. She locked eyes with Elian. The rogue's eyes went wide. "Hide," she mouthed, pointing to the heavy velvet drapes flanking the massive bed. Elian didn't hesitate. He melted into the shadows behind the fabric, just as the door handle began to turn. Lisa threw the fire poker back onto the hearth, grabbed a heavy wool shawl, and wrapped it tightly around her shoulders, ruffling her hair to look as though she had just risen from bed. "A moment, King Kalen," she called out, her voice perfectly steady, laced with just the right amount of sleep-heavy irritation. She opened the door. Kalen stood in the corridor, flanked by 2 immense guards. His eyes, predatory and sharp, swept over her, then immediately looked past her shoulder into the room. He didn't step in, but he tilted his head, taking a long, slow breath through his nose. Lisa's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Elian had masked his scent, but Kalen was an ancient alpha. His senses were mythic. "Is there a problem, Your Majesty?" Lisa asked, keeping her tone cold. "It is the middle of the night." Kalen's gaze snapped back to her. His nostrils flared slightly. "There is a draft in your chambers, Luna. I smelled the mountain air and something else. Something like wet earth." Lisa forced a tired sigh, pulling the shawl tighter. "The fire is dying down, and I opened the balcony doors a fraction. The air in this fortress is stifling. I prefer the smell of the mountain to the smell of old stone. If that violates my terms of sanctuary, I apologize." Kalen stared at her for a long, agonizing moment. He was searching for a lie, searching for a tremor in her heartbeat. Lisa held his gaze, channeling every ounce of her rage at David and her fear for Leo into a mask of pure, unadulterated defiance. Finally, Kalen smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Your preferences are noted, Luna. Sleep well. Do close the doors, though. The drop is quite treacherous." He turned and walked away, the guards following in lockstep. Lisa closed the door and leaned her forehead against the heavy oak, her knees trembling so violently she almost collapsed. Elian stepped out from the curtains, exhaling a breath he seemed to have held for a minute straight. "By the gods, you have ice in your veins. I have a child in that crib." Lisa turned to him, her eyes fierce and determined. "I will not risk his life on a rope, and I will not let Kaelin use him to start a war." "Then what do we do?" Elian asked, looking lost for the first time. "I can't go back empty-handed." "You won't," Lisa said, walking over to the small writing desk. She didn't write a letter. Paper could be intercepted. She looked at Elian. "You have a perfect memory, Rogue. I survive by it." "Good. Tell David this." Lisa's voice was a blade in the dark. "Tell him I am not his prize to be stolen back. Kaelin wants the silver mines. He intends to use my presence to provoke a war and claim them. Tell David that if he truly wants to fix his mistake, he doesn't need to send a thief." She stepped closer to Elian, pressing the wooden wolf back into his hand. "Tell him to send the Lycan King an invitation." Elian slipped back into the Silvermane territory like a shadow, detaching itself from the night. He found Alpha King David in the war room, not poring over maps, but staring blankly into the dying embers of the hearth. The dark circles under David's eyes spoke of the agonizing days spent waiting for the rogue's return. When Elian placed the small wooden wolf pup on the heavy oak table, David's breath hitched. He reached for it, his fingers trembling slightly as they brushed the carved wood. "She refused?" David's voice was hollow, the sound of a man who had played his last card and lost. "She didn't just refuse, sire," Elian said, pouring himself a goblet of water from a silver pitcher. "She outsmarted us both. The Lycan King doesn't care about a fractured bond or a fleeing mate. He's using her sanctuary as a pretense to claim the silver mines. If you attack, you give him the war he wants. If you sneak her out, she risks the heir's life on a frozen cliff." David's brow furrowed, the gears in his mind finally snapping back into place, overriding his grief with alpha logic. "Then what is her play?" "She told me to tell you." Elian paused, a faint smirk touching his lips. "To stop acting like a thief, and send the Lycan King an invitation." David stared at the wooden wolf. Slowly, the crushing weight in his chest was pierced by a sharp, unfamiliar sensation. Pride. Pure, unadulterated pride. His mate wasn't cowering in a gilded cage. She was reading the board, seeing the traps he had been too blind to notice. "An invitation," David murmured, standing up straight. The feral, desperate edge in his eyes vanished, replaced by the calculating coldness of a king. "Marcus." The beta appeared in the doorway almost instantly. "Draft a formal missive to King Kaelin of the Lycan court," David ordered, his voice ringing with newfound authority. "Propose a summit of sovereigns at the Whispering Pass in exactly 2 weeks. Tell him the Silvermane wishes to discuss a permanent, highly lucrative trade treaty regarding the southern silver veins." Marcus blinked. "A treaty? Sire, he has your wife." "He has a political hostage disguised as a guest," David corrected, walking past Marcus. "If I demand her back, I am a jealous mate. If I offer him the wealth he craves on a silver platter, in front of the entire continent's delegates, he loses his justification for war. Lisa just gave us the key to her own cell. We just have to turn it." 2 weeks later, the Whispering Pass was transformed. The neutral valley between the two territories was filled with the snapping banners of both courts. The tension in the frigid mountain air was thick enough to choke on. David sat at the head of a massive, circular table carved from a single fallen redwood. He wore his formal regalia, the heavy silver crown resting upon his brow, his posture relaxed but utterly immovable. A horn sounded, a deep, bone-rattling blast. King Kaelin arrived. He was flanked by General Silas and a dozen Lycan elites. But it was the woman walking beside him that stopped the breath in David's throat. Lisa wore a gown of midnight blue and silver, her head held high, her expression unreadable. She looked magnificent. She looked like a queen who belonged to no one but herself. Kalen took his seat opposite David. Lisa sat to Kalen's right. She did not look at David. Alpha David, Kalen rumbled, his icy eyes sweeping over the treaty documents laid out on the table. A sudden shift in strategy. From blockades and border skirmishes to open ledgers. I must admit, I am intrigued. War is bad for business, King Kalen, David said smoothly, leaning forward. He didn't let his gaze linger on Lisa. He had to play this perfectly. The Silver Mane has a surplus of refined ore. You have a need to fund your northern expansions. This treaty grants you preferential trade rates, 20% below market value, in exchange for a century of ironclad peace between our borders. Kalen steepled his fingers, staring at David. He knew exactly what this was. It was a golden bridge. If Kalen refused it, he would look like a warmonger to his own council. He would lose the moral high ground of sanctuary and expose his true greed. It is a generous offer, Kalen finally said, his voice a low purr of dangerous respect. But a treaty requires trust, and trust is currently a fragile commodity. Trust is built on mutual benefit, David countered, his golden eyes locking with Kalen's. Sign the treaty, Kalen. Secure your wealth, and let us end this theater. Kalen looked at the parchment, then turned to Lisa. What say you, Luna? Is this a trap laid by a desperate man? Lisa finally raised her eyes. She looked across the table, not at the Alpha King, but at the man who had broken her heart. She saw the humility in his posture, the raw, unfiltered plea in his eyes. He wasn't demanding her back. He was dismantling the cage so she could walk out if she chose to. It is a fair treaty, Your Majesty, Lisa said, her voice carrying clearly across the silent valley. It provides exactly what you truly desire. As for trust, that is something that must be earned day by day. Kalen held her gaze for a long moment, searching for a tremor of weakness. Finding none, a slow, grim smile spread across his face. Very well, Kalen said, reaching for the quill. He signed the parchment with a heavy, sweeping hand. The treaty is forged. He stood up, looking down at David. You play a dangerous game, Alpha, but you play it well. Your guest is free to leave, as she always was. Kalen turned and walked away, his guards falling in line. He didn't look back. He had gotten what he came for, even if he had to concede the pawn. The delegates began to disperse, leaving David and Lisa alone at the massive table. The silence between them was heavier than the mountain air. David stood up slowly. He didn't close the distance between them. He stayed on his side of the table, his hands resting flat against the wood. Lisa, he said, his voice cracking slightly. You didn't bring an army, she said quietly, her eyes tracing the grain of the redwood. You told me not to. You listened. I will always listen to you now, David said, his voice thick with emotion. I broke our bond, Lisa. I let grief and stupidity poison the best thing that ever happened to me. I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I am asking you to come home. Not behind me. Beside me. Where you have always belonged. Lisa stood up. She looked at him, seeing the dark circles, the raw sorrow, the genuine remorse. The bond between them, though scarred and fragile, hummed with a quiet truth. He meant every word. Elena, she asked, the name tasting like ash. Exiled, David said instantly. She will never set foot in our lands again. Lisa took a slow, deep breath, letting the icy wind wash over her. She had survived the betrayal. She had survived the Lycan King. She was no longer just a mate. She was a survivor, a mother, a queen in her own right. I am coming back for Leo. I am coming back for my pack, Lisa said, finally meeting his gaze. Her eyes were hard, but not cold. As for you, David, you have a lifetime to prove to me that you are worthy of standing beside me. We build from the ashes, and this time, I hold the matches. David bowed his head, a single tear cutting through the dust on his cheek. As you command, my queen. The Silvermane pack thrived in the years that followed. The treaty held, bringing unprecedented prosperity, but the true strength of the territory lay in its Luna. Lisa ruled with a sharp intellect and a compassionate heart, her authority unquestioned. David walked beside her, a humbled king who spent every waking moment honoring the second chance he had been given. The scar on their bond never completely faded, but it became a reminder rather than a wound, a testament to a love that was shattered, reforged in the fires of betrayal, and made stronger at the broken places. If you enjoyed this journey of betrayal, strategy, and redemption, please like, share, and